Hello, I'm Fiona Solomon, the CEO of the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, and it's a pleasure to be able to present to you remotely to the Aluminium International Today conference. I'm going to talk a bit about ASI's progress, some of the sustainability megatrends that we're seeing, and the growth of responsible sourcing interest and initiatives, particularly for this supply chain. So I'll start first with some of the drivers for sustainability. I think we're all aware of the various sustainability megatrends that are facing governments, businesses, even individuals in their daily lives and in their daily business. And they include climate change, of course, a really important one for the aluminium supply chain, but also issues such as resource scarcity, which may not be such a concern for bauxite, but certainly a range of other commodities, whether mineral or otherwise. We see a critical importance around circular economy principles, and this, of course, is a real strength for aluminium and something that we should continue to build on and emphasise in the years ahead. We see growing supply chain risks through instability of supply chains, through things like the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course is front of mind for many of us. And against that, we also see issues coming through from rapid technology change, which can bring, of course, benefits, but also risks and dynamic changes, which have unforeseen consequences. And of course, the incredible growth in urbanisation that we're seeing in many countries brings opportunities, perhaps for applications in sectors which use aluminium, but also other kinds of pressures, again, as we've seen through the COVID pandemic in recent months. And we are, of course, through this situation that everybody's grappling with, seeing increasing calls to build back better, to take advantage of the challenges that are ahead of us and think about how, as we move to adapt to those, that we can change the way we do things. So with our megatrends, we know that businesses were already thinking about how to grapple with these challenges. And of course, what we've seen with COVID-19 is an interconnection with those megatrends and, of course, the amplification of some of them as well. And what we really saw was this sudden elevation of risks and impacts for business and an exposure to businesses and, of course, to individuals about what exponential change means. And we're seeing a lot of parallels drawn, of course, with climate change, where change can appear slow and then we become on a runaway train to exponential change as well. In terms of the impact on businesses, we're seeing a real pressure to survive on some sectors, particularly travel or hospitality and so on. We're seeing other businesses that are adapting and pivoting really strongly. They're learning from the crisis and they can use those skills and that agility to also to apply to sustainability challenges. So I think that if we look ahead, that ability to invest in new approaches to address these critical challenges that we have for us as a world community and as a planet is really going to depend on economic resilience, on the human resources that are available to us, and how we prioritise all of those in terms of investment. ASI also tries to take a long-term view in terms of its theory of change and what it's trying to achieve. And we have three long-term goals. We want to see stakeholders increasingly invest in and reward improved practices and responsible sourcing for aluminium. We want to see on the ground that sustainability and human rights principles are increasingly embedded in aluminium production, use and recycling. And of course, we want to see aluminium continue to improve its sustainability credentials over time. And we have a number of short-term and medium-term outcomes that we're working towards that we'd like to see through implementation of our certification program. And we, of course, as an organisation, have a number of strategies that we have in place to try and maximise the ability for us to reach those goals. So let's have a look at some simple data that we have available to us at the moment. One of our goals is to see the uptake of ASI continue to grow year on year, and we've been seeing that both over time and across a diverse range of sectors. ASI, of course, is a multi-stakeholder organisation, so we're keen to see uptake both amongst producers and transformers of aluminium, the upstream part of the supply chain, if you will, as well as downstream users and downstream use sectors. And we have a couple of classes in ASI called industrial users, which seek ASI certification, and other downstream supporters that support ASI's work and may move towards certification in the future. We have civil society members, we have associations that work with us to expand and collaborate with us on sustainability issues, and other kinds of supporters as well. I think the interesting thing that we've seen, and it's particularly stark in the last couple of years, is the really strong uptake in the upstream part of the supply chain. And we want to see that in future years roll out into downstream use sectors as well. Next, of course, we're keen to see ASI certification be implemented over time and in a range of sectors and places, because implementation of the ASI standards is a demonstration of responsible practices being applied through the supply chain. And of course, that's what we're all about in ASI. So we see that in our first year, we had just over 10 certifications issued. We had strong growth last year, and we were on track for that again this year, of course, until the pandemic, where that has slowed, particularly the ability to audit on site. We have brought out COVID-19 policies for audit and audit-related travel, making provision for remote audits to take place, particularly for chain of custody standard, but also for some aspects of the performance standard. And what's been really gratifying to us is that our initial versions of the policy were really more making provision for people to delay their assurance programs. And instead, we've found that people are really keen to keep on track with their aim. So while we've seen a bit of a slowdown in April and May in terms of certifications coming through, we can see that the pipeline is strong and we're going to have a real uptick in the coming months. So that's been exciting to see that that commitment is still in fact there. In terms of what parts of the supply chain are implementing the performance standard, we see a really nice spread throughout the value chain, from mining through to refining, smelting, recycling, cast houses, the semi-fabrication stages, and then on through to downstream. So again, as per my earlier slide around the membership distribution, we have more members that are active in the kind of mining through to material conversion stages, and then further downstream is somewhere that we want to work on and see that uptake pick up as well. Those downstream parts of the supply chain, in terms of applying the performance standard, are really looking at the material stewardship part of our standard, so those circular economy principles. And of course, that's really important for us that that be a responsibility that's shared right through the value chain. Turning now to chain of custody standard, again, we see a nice distribution through the value chain. Importantly, we see all parts of the value chain represented, and we group together anything past the cast house as a supply chain activity that we call post-cast house. So that's why you see that uptick there. So that includes semi-fabrication, which you could see on the previous slide was quite a high degree of implementation, plus everything beyond that as well. In terms of certifications by sector, I think this is an interesting question, and we've done a bit of an estimate in terms of the incidence of different sectors in the ASI certifications that we have. Some of those are more straightforward, whether they're primary or secondary producers, whether they're in a semi-fabricator, but the use sectors such as packaging, automotive and construction are really based on an estimate of what those particular entities are producing their products for. So for material converters, for example, we have a lot of foil manufacturers that are part of ASI and are implementing ASI certifications, and that's why you see such a strong uptake for the packaging sector. In terms of automotive, that's our next strongest sector, and construction is the third. So again, these are a couple of downstream sectors that we're really keen to kind of work on and see those start to grow, so that we start to reflect the general use sector for aluminium in our certification uptake as well. In terms of uptake by country, we have 32 countries in which ASI certification have been implemented, and we've got a really nice distribution across those. So our top two countries are in fact Germany and China, and then we have a range of countries, and of course it keeps updating as we get new certifications coming through. So let's turn now to some of the drivers for responsible sourcing. We've seen, of course, that the London Metal Exchange is bringing out new responsible sourcing rules. They announced that in October last year, and ASI is working closely with LME on these in terms of aligning the ASI performance standard to enable those ASI members that seek certification to fulfill the LME requirements through the ASI certification process. The LME rules apply to their listed brands, so in other words, that's smelters and for the primary production, and also secondary producers for some of their alloy products. There's a few bits of detail that we're working through on that, but we hope to have some more information that we can share in the coming months in terms of what that standard revision is going to look like. Of course, aluminium is not the only sector that's working on this. All of the other LME commodities are likewise looking at how they'll address it, with tin being the only one currently that has the equivalent of a conflict-free sourcing program, because tin was one of the original metals under the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas to be included in that work. So they've been working on this since around 2012. LME is effectively rolling out the same OECD principles to all of the other commodities that are part of their trading platform. So that's a kind of a compliance example, but we also have concerns that different parts of the supply chain look to address. We may have concerns being raised from civil society and non-government organisations, whether that's from an environmental perspective, such as this example in Ghana, or perhaps from a human rights perspective. There was recently a Human Rights Watch report a couple of years ago looking at Guinea. So these kinds of concerns around where material comes from, what kind of sustainability related impacts are taking place, flow through supply chains ultimately to downstream users that have concerns around what sorts of risks are in their supply chains and how they might feasibly manage those. We also see a focus on individual materials with the war on plastic, if you like, that was happening in the last few years. So of course, we're seeing less of that in the media at the moment. But with the plastic versus aluminium versus other materials, what is the best choice from an environmental point of view? And for those downstream users that do have choice about what material they use, there is a lot of assessment that goes into, well, which brings certain kinds of benefits and impacts in terms of material choice. And of course, we're also seeing technology investments taking place. The carbon anode work that Apple, Rio Tinto, Alcoa and the Canadian government are investing in is one example of a range of technology investments in this supply chain and others that's looking at how we support responsible sourcing concerns. Within ASI, what we're really seeing is that it can become a forum for these sorts of partnerships, for due diligence type information to be carried through, and for ultimately that information to be carried through to consumers in the form of on-product labelling. So we have an example here from a few years ago between Nespresso and Rio Tinto, where a large downstream brand such as Nespresso has publicly communicated its desire to have responsibly sourced aluminium for all its production, whether that's primary production, whether that's closing the loop and having recycled content in their pods and so on, but really seeing this as an important issue that they're wanting to tackle. We're also seeing, which we did not expect at the start of the ASI program, an interest from this strong packaging sector uptake in having on-product labelling. It was something that we talked about in developing the ASI certification program. And in those earlier days, sort of 2016, 2017, people thought, yeah, I'm not sure I'd really, use a label on a product. What we've seen is one of our members in particular being really interested in having on-product labelling, and for aseptic cartons, like this example, that precedent is already there with paperboard certification through programs like the Forest Stewardship Council. So you have a sector that's kind of used to on-product labelling around the sourcing of different materials. You have the paperboard on the outside. A lot of consumers may not even know that aluminium foil layers are within that. So bringing that onto the labelling is a really valuable way to tell the story of ASI and to tell the story of responsible supply chains. And of course, to be able to make a claim on a product at the end of the supply chain, what's needed is certification right through that value chain. So this slide gives a visual representation of the certifications and the individual members that are each of these supply chain stages. And one of the things that is unique about ASI is our standards require that those responsible practices be applied through the performance standard at each of those steps, not just at the point of production. So for ASI, we have standards that apply bauxite mining, alumina refining, aluminium smelting, semi-fabrication, material conversion, and through to downstream. And of course, wanting to incentivize the recycling piece as well and the practices that are applied by those kinds of entities. So ASI is quite unique and different from some of the other natural resource sectors in that way, in wrapping its arms around the whole value chain and making us all understand that we all have responsibilities in that direction. So one of the things that we really see some of the benefits of ASI for supporting supply chain engagement. Well, we know that there's a growing stakeholder focus on what risks there are in mineral supply chains, whether that's back to mines or whether it's back to recycled sources, connecting, for example, to collection systems, to labour issues within that and so on. These international expectations are only going to increase in momentum. We see that through the LME example, but of course there's a whole range of stakeholders that are increasingly wanting to see these risks understood and well managed. So it's very important, I think, if you are in the aluminium value chain, to make sure that you're aware of that and that you're not also the last to the table. The things that you need to think about is how might you be proactive and influence your suppliers and customers, because when you're looking at a supply chain level, it's not just about what you're doing, but understanding what those entities that you deal with are doing as well. And I think coming back to this circular economy point, aluminium has a strong track record in terms of the infinite recyclability, but we still have much work ahead of us to make that real and to stop losing metal from the system. ASI, of course, focuses on a wide range of sustainability issues. We're not only a carbon standard or a labour standard or an environmental management standard. We're trying to make sure that we see the interconnections and the relationships between these sustainability issues and wrap them together in one performance standard that's been negotiated through a process that takes account of a wide range of stakeholder voices. And as a result, we see that ASI can be used to address a wide range of supply chain risks. The other point about ASI is that it's not somebody at the end of the supply chain trying to reach back through and understand what practices are, but instead entities can come forward, demonstrate how they're applying the ASI standard and have that assurance carried forward through the value chain. So it reduces duplication. If you have downstream users agreeing, yeah, I think ASI covers what I need, then it avoids the proliferation of many different standards that are cunningly similar but always have some differences and require a lot of work to address in a bespoke way for many different customers. The idea of ASI is to try and reduce that duplication and have one consistent standard that meets the needs of stakeholders that engage with it. So in that way, we aim to be a global platform that suppliers and customers and of course stakeholders can engage and to use to manage those supply chain risks. I think the other really great benefit of ASI that I've certainly seen in my time with the organisation is the opportunity for many industries to have learnings and issues that are shared across those. Often, if you're in the packaging sector, you might well understand that sector, but not have had the opportunity to link across into transport or construction and understand what lessons can be learned there, or perhaps even how coalitions can be made to address issues in common. And of course, through our NGO and civil society membership, we provide an opportunity to engage on those topics with those groups to think about what their longer term missions and objectives are and how a standard like ASI can help to deliver those. So one of the important things, of course, as I've mentioned a few times, is that the ASI standards underpin our certification program, and we're at the moment embarking on a major revision during 2020 and 2021. We're allowing 2 years for that process because it's a big piece of work and we want to make sure that we hear from everybody that has an interest and some perspectives on how we're doing and where we should be going. So some of the major topics that we're addressing in this standards revision are looking at the assurance system, how that's been implemented to date and where we can provide further guidance and clarification on how things work. We are looking to work on the claims guide. As I mentioned, we've had a lot more interest in on-package labelling in terms of product-related claims. So we want to amplify that section and make sure that that's clearer going forward as well, and to provide more linkages into our monitoring and evaluation program. So we're collecting data on some things, building data collection on other areas, and the point of that is to make sure that we understand what kind of impact we're actually having. Are all of the activities that member companies are being asked to do as they seek to certify their operations, are they actually leading to change on the ground? So those are some of the things that we're wanting to make sure that we capture and reflect on as part of this process. We're looking, of course, at the chain of custody standard in practice. Are there changes or evolutions that we can make in order to make implementation more understandable, to support implementation of different aspects relating to due diligence, at looking at supporting recycling inputs and things like this? I've already talked about the London Metal Exchange. That's a really important alignment piece that we'll be doing that primarily affects listed brands. So in other words, the various producers that list and sell through LME, but will of course flow back through supply chains as it aligns with the OECD guidance. And of course, generally, we're looking at all of our sustainability criteria in the performance standard and the implementation guidance that we have, and making sure that we're answering all the questions that are coming through, that we're having it tailored to where stakeholder and our member expectations are. So it's a big piece of work. We have a dedicated web page link there, so that's the place to keep in touch and check in on how things are going. In terms of our timeline, we're working towards the end of next year to finalise the revision process. In terms of standards revision decision-making process, it's a complicated piece. We have ourselves within the Secretariat doing the drafting and managing the processes, but there will also be opportunity for public consultation. We engage with our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Forum, We have a number of working groups that are working on key topics. We also have legal input. So all of that flows through the Standards Committee, through a number of consultation phases, and then ultimately the standard comes to the board for adoption. So to conclude, ASI, we're really a global multi-stakeholder initiative, and our focus is firmly on sustainability issues. We believe we've built a robust program for supply chain engagement and improvement, and we're really seeing those members and certifications continuing to grow and a real sense of momentum building. What we've been pleased to see is that our current and even new member commitments have been maintained through this COVID-19 pandemic, and we've continued to have some new members coming in even during this challenging time. So we see that as a real litmus test for commitment to sustainability, and we hope to see that continue through the uncertain times that we still have ahead. So collectively, we believe that we can work to achieve shared impact through scale, through collaborating together, and through implementing our program. If you want to find out more about how to engage with ASI, please do visit our website. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter. There's information about membership if you're not already part of ASI, or of course, we're happy to also arrange a discussion with you. So thank you. I wish you all the best, hoping we can connect again in person soon.